I wasn't supposed to be on her laptop that morning. Our shared desktop had crashed the night before, and I needed to check my work email. She wasn't home, off at one of her usual meetings, so I grabbed her MacBook, figuring it was quicker than trying to fix our computer before my morning coffee. She'd never been secretive about her stuff, we shared everything. Or at least, I thought we did. The browser opened, and her email was right there. Normally, I'd have ignored it, logged out, and done my own thing. But this time, something was off. Maybe it was the subject line of the last email she had opened, our next meetup. It wasn't from a name I recognized, just initials, DP. I stared at it for a second, telling myself to mind my own business. But my gut twisted. There's this thing that happens when you just know something is wrong, even if you can't fully articulate why. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The message popped up. It was short, casual even, just a few lines about scheduling. But there was something about the way it was worded that hit me hard. "Can't wait to see you again," it said. Last time was unforgettable. It was signed off, David. My pulse started to race. David. My wife had mentioned that name before, back when we were dating. David was her old professor from college. The one she'd always talked about like he was some kind of intellectual mentor, a person she could bounce ideas off of. I'd never really thought much about it. Everyone had a favorite teacher, right? She told me they stayed in touch here and there, usually when she needed career advice. That's all it had ever been. Or so I thought. I was still sitting there, staring at the screen, when the second email came in. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. I could have just shut the laptop, walked away, but I couldn't stop myself from reading. This one was different. No casual scheduling this time. No vague mentions of meeting up. It was graphic. Explicit. The kind of email you don't accidentally leave open on a shared computer. The kind that leaves no doubt about what's really going on. I could feel my face getting hot, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The words jumped off the screen, descriptions of their secret office meetings, of whispered conversations turning into something much more physical. I found myself frozen in place, the world around me blurring as I scanned each sentence. They'd planned their next meeting, and I could see the details unfolding in front of me like some kind of twisted script, where, when, and how they'd be sure not to get caught. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. My wife wasn't just reconnecting with her old professor for professional advice. She was having an affair. And she hadn't even bothered to hide it. The room felt colder as I sat there, the laptop now closed but the weight of what I'd just discovered pressing hard on my chest. I wasn't sure what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to call her, to scream and demand answers. But another part of me, the one that was still in shock, knew I needed to be careful. I had no idea how long this had been going on or just how deep it went. I needed more than just a single email to understand the full scope of their betrayal. I opened the laptop again, my fingers almost moving on their own, navigating through her inbox, her files. This time, I wasn't looking for more vague references or hints, I was looking for undeniable proof. And it didn't take long to find. A folder in her email titled Work. The kind of thing you'd glance at and never think twice about. Inside were dozens of messages between her and David. Months worth. What started as professional advice about publishing and academic opportunities had gradually transformed into something more personal, more intimate. Their exchanges began to blur the line between work and something else entirely. It was the kind of slow burn attraction you hear about, where intellectual conversations turn into flirty comments, and before long, those comments aren't just words on a screen anymore. I clicked on one of the earliest emails from her to him. It was innocent enough, a request for feedback on a paper she was writing. But his reply stood out. It was too warm, too complimentary, and I could sense the underlying tension even in those early days. "You've always been my brightest student," he'd written. "I miss our conversations from back when we had the freedom to talk for hours." From there, the tone shifted. He started writing things like, "I wish I could see you in person again," and, "I've always been drawn to you." I felt my stomach tighten. But it wasn't until I found the first set of photos that I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They were nothing overt at first. A photo of them at a cafe, smiling innocently enough. But then there were others, taken late at night in what looked like his office, her standing too close to him, their faces far too intimate for any innocent meeting. She was wearing the kind of outfits that made her look like she'd just stepped out of a magazine, tight skirts that hugged her curves, blouses that left little to the imagination. I always thought she dressed that way because she liked looking good. Now I realized it wasn't just for herself. She was dressing for him. The last batch of emails I found left no doubt about what they were doing behind closed doors. Detailed plans about meeting up in his office, how they had to be discreet, how he'd make sure no one on the faculty knew. There was something almost clinical about the way they discussed sneaking around, like it was just another part of their workday routine. But then the language shifted again, and it became personal, physical. He described what he wanted to do to her, and she responded with equal intensity. I felt sick. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the fact that she'd lied so easily, so casually, for months. And I'd bought it. All of it. I couldn't sit there any longer. I shut the laptop and stood up, pacing the room. The betrayal was bad enough, but what made it worse was knowing that they worked together at the same prestigious university. They were both respected, trusted by students and colleagues alike. They hid behind their academic titles while sneaking around like teenagers. And I had the proof to expose them both. I could feel my anger building. They thought they were so clever, so untouchable. But they hadn't counted on me finding out. And now that I knew everything, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not without consequences. I grabbed my phone and snapped pictures of the emails, the photos, every piece of evidence I could find. I was going to bring their entire world crashing down around them. I spent the rest of that day in a fog. I didn't leave the house, didn't bother pretending that everything was normal. I was consumed by the betrayal, my thoughts racing between the past and the present, replaying every moment where I should have seen the signs. Every time she'd left for a meeting, every late-night email she'd claimed was just work. It was all lies. I knew I had to confront her at some point, but not yet. Not until I had a plan. Confronting her in the heat of the moment wouldn't change anything, and it wouldn't get me the satisfaction I needed. No, I wanted them both to pay. I wanted their lives, professional and personal, to unravel just like mine had. As the hours passed, my mind kept returning to the university. The prestigious institution where they both worked. My wife had always been proud of her position there, and she'd spoken about David like he was some kind of academic rock star. They were both well respected, trusted to mentor students, to maintain the highest standards of professional conduct. If the faculty knew what they were doing, they'd be ruined. David would lose his career, no one would look at him the same again. And my wife? She'd lose everything she'd worked for. The idea of exposing them publicly started to take root in my mind. I could almost see it, the scandal, the whispers in the faculty lounges, the damage to their reputations. They thought they were so clever, hiding behind their office doors, but they weren't going to get away with it. I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos again. They were enough. More than enough. The explicit messages, the late-night meetings, the photos that looked way too cozy for a professor and his former student. They wouldn't be able to talk their way out of this. But how to do it? I needed to be smart about it, precise. It couldn't just be a confrontation at home, it needed to hit them where it hurt the most. I wanted the exposure to be public, undeniable. An email. It was the perfect way to lay it all out, to make sure that their colleagues and supervisors saw everything. The entire faculty needed to know. This wasn't just some petty revenge, this was justice. They had crossed a line, and the people who trusted them to behave professionally deserved to know the truth. I'd send the email anonymously, of course. I didn't want to be tied to it directly, at least not at first. I wanted to see them squirm, to see how they'd try to explain themselves once the truth was out in the open. That night, I drafted the email. It was short, to the point, and filled with enough evidence to destroy them both. I made sure to attach the photos and screenshots of their most incriminating messages. There was no way anyone could mistake what they'd been doing. The subject line read, "Professional misconduct between faculty members." That would catch the attention of anyone on the faculty board. I stared at the draft for a while, my finger hovering over the send button. I knew that once I clicked it, there was no turning back. Everything would change. But the more I thought about the months of lies, the more I thought about her sneaking off to meet him in his office, the easier it became. With one final breath, I pressed send. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something, anything, to happen. My wife had come home late, as usual, slipping into bed without much conversation. It was routine now. Another work meeting, another night of pretending everything was normal. But this time, I wasn't the one pretending. I woke up early the next morning, checking my phone before my feet even hit the floor. The email I'd sent to the faculty board hadn't gone unnoticed. There were already responses, faculty members CC'd in chains that grew longer with each reply. Some of the messages were brief, just questions, people unsure of how to handle something like this. Others were formal, from higher-ups who were clearly alarmed by the allegations. But the one that made me pause was from the dean. His reply was simple but chilling: "This matter will be thoroughly investigated." The faculty involved will be contacted immediately. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I imagine the dean's office, quiet, formal, the walls lined with certificates and framed photos of past presidents of the university. I pictured him sitting behind his heavy wooden desk, reading the email I'd sent, the images of David and my wife on his screen. The thought of it filled me with a grim sense of satisfaction. My wife was still asleep when I got up and made my way to the kitchen. I could hear her light breathing from the bedroom, completely unaware of what was happening. She had no idea that within hours, her entire career could come crashing down. I wondered if David had seen the email yet, or if he was still going about his morning routine, blissfully ignorant. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed. Another email. This one was different, a direct message from a colleague of David's. The tone was surprised, almost shocked. I don't know what's going on, but I thought you should know there's a rumor spreading fast. Something about David and someone on the faculty. People are talking. Have you heard anything? I grinned. The email was starting to circulate. The rumor mill was grinding into full force. Academic settings like theirs were formal on the surface, but they thrived on gossip. Everyone knew everyone's business, and once a scandal broke, it didn't take long for it to spread like wildfire. I sat down at the table, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety. The wheels were in motion. There was no stopping it now. My wife and David were going to be exposed, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. They had no idea that their affair, carefully hidden behind office doors and secret emails, was about to be laid bare for everyone to see. A few hours later, the first real crack appeared. I heard my wife's phone buzz from the bedroom. Then, another buzz. I couldn't see her face, but I knew what was happening. Someone on the faculty had reached out to her. She was seeing the fallout in real time, the way I had just a few hours earlier. I waited, listening to the rustling of sheets, the sound of her fumbling for the phone. Then, silence. The kind of silence that tells you someone has just seen something they weren't expecting, something that knocks the breath out of them. A minute passed. Then two. Finally, she came into the kitchen, her face pale, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Something's wrong at work, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I think there's been some kind of mistake. She was trying to play it cool, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Oh? I said, pretending to be clueless. What kind of mistake? She bit her lip, staring at her phone again, scrolling through her messages. I don't know. There's this rumor going around. About me and David. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. David? As in your old professor? I asked, my voice calm but pointed. She looked up at me, her eyes widening in surprise, like she hadn't expected me to connect the dots so quickly. Yeah, but it's not what people are saying. I think someone's trying to start something, some lie. Are you sure it's a lie? I cut her off, my voice firmer now. Because it doesn't sound like a lie to me. Her face drained of color. She stared at me, speechless for the first time in what felt like forever. The truth was finally catching up to her. The moment hung between us, thick with tension. She stood there, frozen, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand. I could see the gears turning in her head, desperately trying to come up with an explanation, something to smooth this over. But she knew. She knew I wasn't asking out of ignorance. I already knew the truth. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Instead, her eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out of this confrontation. Finally, she managed to whisper, "What do you mean?" I saw everything, I said, my voice calm but cold. The emails. The photos. The meetings. All of it. The color drained from her face even more, if that was even possible. Her hands started shaking, and she put her phone down on the kitchen counter like it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. You looked through my emails?" She stammered, like that was the real crime here. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't try to turn this around on me. You left it all there, right in front of me. You didn't even bother to hide it." She took a shaky breath, her eyes welling up with tears. "It wasn't. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said quietly. "It started off innocent, I swear. Just talking about work, catching up. I never meant to." "Stop lying," I cut her off. "I read everything. I saw what you wrote to him. I saw what you did with him. Don't stand there and tell me it wasn't what it clearly was." She sank into the chair at the kitchen table, her hands covering her face. I watched her crumble, the weight of what she had done finally crashing down on her. But I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. All I felt was a cold sense of justice. She didn't even try to defend herself after that. She knew it was over. I didn't need to say anything else, and honestly, there wasn't anything left to say between us. The real confrontation wasn't between her and me anymore. It was between her and the rest of the university. Her phone buzzed again. Then again. I watched her flinch with each vibration, knowing what it meant. She wasn't the only one getting messages. David was probably dealing with the fallout on his end too. Word was spreading, fast. "I sent everything to the faculty," I said, breaking the silence. Her head snapped up, her face a mixture of disbelief and horror. "All the photos. The messages. Everyone knows now." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open like she couldn't quite process what I had just said. Then, her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard that her knuckles turned white. You sent it to the university?" Her voice cracked. I nodded. "They deserve to know. You and David think you can get away with this, but not anymore. Your perfect little world is about to fall apart." For a moment, she just sat there, motionless, as if she was trying to absorb the full impact of what I'd done. Then, without warning, she stood up and rushed out of the kitchen, her phone in hand. I heard the door to our bedroom slam shut, followed by the muffled sound of her crying. It should have hurt me to hear her break down like that, but all I felt was numb. I grabbed my coffee and moved to the living room, sitting down on the couch with my phone in hand. I opened my email, checking to see if there were any more updates. Sure enough, there were several. Faculty members had replied, some shocked, some asking for meetings to discuss the situation, as they politely called it. But the best one came from the dean's office, a formal notice that an immediate investigation was being launched into both David and my wife's conduct. I leaned back, letting out a long breath. I had done it. I had exposed them both. And then, the final blow landed. My phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from one of the faculty's internal message boards. I opened it, and there it was, my email, with all the attachments, had gone viral. Faculty members, students, even some administrative staff were sharing it. Within minutes, the affair between my wife and David had become the university's worst-kept secret. I watched it all unfold from my couch, the fallout beginning in real time. Messages started flooding in from people who couldn't believe what they were reading, who felt betrayed by two people they had trusted. My wife's reputation, David's career, they were unraveling, just as I'd imagined. For a brief moment, I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then I thought about everything they'd done, the lies they'd told, the way they had betrayed not just me, but everyone around them. No, I hadn't gone too far. I had simply revealed the truth. As I sat there, watching the chaos spread, I knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. What would you do if you found out your partner was involved with someone from their past? Would you confront them or expose their secret?